All right. I think we're live, though I'm not sure. Yes, we're live. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am so excited for this discussion today called Parents as Teachers' Assistants in a World of Remote Learning. My name is Sam Olivieri. I am a senior principal at Guild Education and a former partner of Entangled Solutions. I will just go out and say, I think this is one of the most important conversations happening today in K-12 education. It is probably a bit of a truism at this point to say that this has been an unprecedented year. And for all of its challenges, it has put parents on center stage as innovators are pushing forward new solutions for serving students at home. And I am so excited to have this group of panelists, each of which are taking on different and important pieces of the puzzle around empowering parents and really meeting the demands of this moment. So what we are going to do for the next 45 minutes or so is really discuss some of the context facing parents today and some of the innovative approaches and solutions for addressing their needs. And then we're going to dig into this question of systems redesign and ask some big questions about whether this massive disruption to business as usual that we are all experiencing could create some opportunities for better meeting the needs of families and really delivering on this promise of equity. So I am super excited to dig into discussion. We also would love to incorporate some input from the audience. So we have some audience poll questions. So hopefully you'll be able to see those and provide your own input, which will then go back to the panelists and we'll incorporate into the discussion on some of these topics to kind of gauge where folks are entering this conversation. For everyone on this panel, this is not a new topic. We are parents and professionals that have been working on these issues for many years, but clearly the challenges of today have put a sharper prism on the need for partnerships between parents and educators. And interestingly, this panel pre-existed COVID. This was planned pre-COVID, but just takes on a whole new meaning today. So with no further ado, I will introduce our panelists. We have Gloria Corral, who is the president and CEO of the Parent Institute for Quality Education, PK. We have Ryan Padrez, who is the medical director for the primary school, and Julia Rivard Dexter, co-founder and CEO of iRead, makers of Squiggle Park and Dreamscape, and Dr. Jody Lavas, who's the vice president of learning and curriculum design for Begin. So fantastic group, amazing perspectives represented today. And to kick us off, I want to start with this question, which is, this panel is called Parents as Teachers' Assistants. But let's start by unpacking that a little bit. And what do we really see as the role of parents? On one hand, certainly connectivity, continuity between the home and the classroom is so important, especially today. And at the same time, children are spending actually only about 20% of their time in school, and that's of course even less today. So do parents want the role of teacher's assistant, or do they see it in another light? I'll kick it to Gloria first to kick us off.
Well, thank you, Sam, so much. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation. And I think that's a really provocative question as a construct for two reasons. One is because the role of a parent, of the parent as a as a teacher or someone who navigates or helps a child navigate their experience has always been true, that we think about that very much when we think of babies, right? That the parent is the child's first and most important teacher, and that's true. I think in this context, though, Sam, I think it's provocative because it is incredibly important for us to think about the inequities and sort of the issues that this moment is asking of families, certainly the families that we serve. And so, I think of this as a moment for us to say, can all parents be their a teacher aide, if you will, or teaching assistant in the context of education? And I think for us, the question is, some can, all parents want to, but I think there are some real equity issues that we need to consider in order for us to really have an honest discussion about what does it mean to be a teacher assistant in this context when there are structural reasons why some families actually cannot engage, right? Whether that's connectivity, whether that's digital literacy, whether that's language barriers, whether that's literacy levels. So all these things are actual structural impediments to having a parent, even in the best case scenario, to really mediate or support learning at home. And so I think for me, this question actually begs the underlying question, which is, can all parents in this context be that teacher assistant? And then who can't? And what do we need to do to support this structurally? Because there are these structural barriers that impede a parent's ability to do that, because every parent wants to support their child's learning. And so that doesn't change in terms of being a teacher. I think it's a teaching assistant in the context of an education framework that I think we really do need to ponder, especially if we aren't talking about it in tandem with structural barriers that impede some families and some communities in this moment where they're struggling with a health crisis, an education crisis, an economic crisis, and a social justice crisis, to really play that role in a meaningful way.
I'm glad you brought up babies, Gloria, as the pediatrician sort of perspective here on the panel. I really appreciate that. And I think that this question was important before COVID, in sense of this pandemic and this, I remember, Sam, we were brainstorming about this panel and some questions, and what I sort of been reflecting a little bit is that, the research shows that, children do better in school, or they're more physically or emotionally healthy when their parents are healthy. And so, conversely, when there's high levels of stress going on, or parents find themselves at reduced kind of emotional capacity to be engaged with their kids, especially around learning and developmental needs. And so when stressed by social isolation or difficulty meeting basic needs, like food or housing, this really impairs their ability to be engaged with a child. So as a pediatrician, I'm always looking for that in my interactions with parents. And now when we just elevate that to the K-12 space and parents sort of as a teaching assistant, this is the same question we need to be asking. And so COVID has just illuminated and elevated this to a whole new level. And so that's sort of where we find ourselves right now.
Yeah, it seems so interesting how, or just this has exposed that schools, we tend to think about schools as their job is to educate children, but of course we all know that they are doing that and many other jobs. And that has been, fundamentally even more illuminated in the COVID crisis. And you realize, how much are we expecting schools to do as well in filling in the gaps that sort of create barriers between kids and their ability to engage in school. Jody, did you want to add something here?
Yeah, I was just gonna, reflect as an educator and as a mom. I think parents' willingness to be a teacher's aide is sort of influenced by all of the things that Gloria and Ryan have mentioned. And I would also say there's a developmental perspective. Their willingness to be a teacher's aide sort of is influenced by the age of their child and their developmental needs. It's also variable by the moment. As a mom who's trying to juggle work and kids learning, my ability to be that teacher's aide is highly influenced by, obviously the factors going on around me. And so, at Homer, one of the things we really think about is how to understand those parent need states and provide experiences that really range from, look, I just need some guilt-free, nutritious screen time for my child that my child can use independently, all the way to, I want to get on the floor, I want to get involved, I want to play with my child off the screen as well. And so really thinking about a range of services, given that parent's ability to serve that role, is going to vary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, Julia, did you want to jump in here?
It seems to me like it needs to be looked at from several different angles. One is kind of what structural supports are there for families who just can't do it, and I think this is a community approach where we can have parents who can support kids, maybe supporting a larger kind of community of education for kids. So that's a major issue. And I think that's one we have to figure out pretty quickly so that kids aren't getting lost. And then there's another issue that I've seen, and the reason I founded my company was because my son was identified as an extremely low reader in grade 4. And I thought I'd done everything for him, as a parent. I thought I'd read to him every night, what did I do wrong? And I realized I had just kind of expected school to teach him. Like, it was the school's job, and I didn't have tools to support him because I wasn't a teacher. And I think that there's a real opportunity, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a real opportunity with technology to support the direct instruction piece, the piece that parents just aren't trained to do. And it's really not fair to expect them to be able to take that on. So I think that I think there's some really amazing things happening in the education industry right now to support parents, but we've got a long way to go to make it easy and flexible so that it meets their personal needs at home, and every home is so different. So yeah, I think there's different lenses for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And excited to dig into that technology question. Before we go there, I think it'd be good to just spend a little time just laying a bit more context. As you all have mentioned, this is already a deeply intersectional space of around housing, healthcare, and education. These are deeply interrelated issues. And we are dealing with a multitude of crises at the same time right now. But can you help us contextualize the current? They're recognizing these are not new issues. Inequity is pervasive and systemic. But help us understand a little bit more about the current reality facing parents. What are you hearing from parents? What are they going through? And how has this impacted the demand that you are seeing in the field for your services and your products?
So I'll jump in, Sam, only because we have had we're coming up on about 25,000 phone conversations, person to person, with families that don't speak English as a first language, who are digitally disconnected. And those are the families that we serve. And what we are hearing from them are two really important things. First, the basic needs need to be met. And because of these concurrent crises, it's incredibly more challenging when you're worried about housing, losing your job. And a lot of the families that we're serving, Sam, they're worried about dying, right? And that is a true concern and fear, and Ryan will attest to that. That kind of toxic stress, or those kinds of high stressors environments for children and families, really mean that their ability to focus what time they have and how to spend those limited resources is really vital. So what we're hearing is we need supports around meeting basic needs in order for us to do the thing that every parent wants, which is transition to support their child's learning. And so the second part of what we're hearing and what has increased the need for our services is actually bridging, building that bridge so that families have that digital literacy that some of us take for granted, when they are using, a phone that's 5 years old that may or may not have the bandwidth that many of us have, right? And so that's the second piece is how do you build their technical abilities and technical skills and digital literacy so that they can navigate this online world, right? That 8 months ago was not their reality. And so it's everything from helping them get an email so that they can log on to their child's school portal and do these other things so they can see a doctor, right? And so those are, for us, have been two big pieces of work that are interconnected. We aren't a direct service provider in terms of basic needs. We quickly had to pivot if we wanted families to really focus and support their child's learning. We had to provide that in order for them to then kind of develop the digital skills and knowledge in a way that was really strengths-based. And I think Julia's point about, they aren't teachers, that's not what, they don't have that kind of skill set, but they do want to, they want to have enough content and knowledge so that they can then identify those resources for their children in a constructive way. And so that's what we're hearing from families.
Yeah, I agree, Gloria. Just to add on to that, in the clinic as a pediatrician, and then what we're hearing from my parent coaching team at the primary school, which works directly with so many of our families, is the same. They're so stressed about getting enough food on the table, paying rent, keeping their job, or if they're able to keep their job, it's a high stress situation where they're going and potentially exposing themselves or families to coronavirus. And so that stress is just real and palpable. And the one other contextual thing I think we would add to this is, and now navigating the home learning environment, children are also manifesting a lot of behavioral and mental health needs as well. They're feeling this stress and it's palpable. And so it's not only engaging as this new teaching parent or parent teacher assistant, it's with an environment that the kids aren't in their normal routines. They can feel the stress at home, and that's a challenge for any really gifted teacher to get a child to be engaged in the learning, let alone now parents that's also managing so much of their own stress. So it's something that's palpable right now.
Yeah. So go ahead, Julia.
Oh, I was just going to follow on just how important it is these days for that relationship with the teacher and the family to be so close. For the first time, you're kind of lifting the curtain on the home, right? Because the parents are your partner in this education process, and every family is so different, but the bond between the educator, the teacher, and the family becomes critically important. And I think that's very different, because I think in a lot of cases, kids went to the school was this kind of closed door space, their child learned, and then they came home. And now it's a much more kind of connected environment, or it should be, or it has to be, if we want to be able to support the unique needs of every family. So I think that's a new role for educators and a new role for parents. And I think it's going to take some supporting to get it right.
Yeah, we're seeing that parents on average are reporting about 27 additional hours that they need to find in their week to take sort of charge of their parents, of their child's education and additional domestic work. And so that's almost just another job on top of all of their other jobs that they have. So 27 extra hours is a challenge. And kids are feeling it too. I think that was a really good point. And parents are looking for solutions. We've seen traffic increase by as much as 300%. So we know parents are definitely looking for solutions to keep their kids educated and motivated to learn, while parents are trying to juggle everything they're trying to juggle.
Yeah, I know we are all parents, and there's a lot of head nodding and looking at those numbers of the amount of additional hours, and just a lot of people are questioning, where does that come from? But I think these points about the hierarchy of needs, and really thinking about the context, and I think Julia, you bring up another point around the one of the things that is shifting is the opportunity for this two-way communication in a much deeper way than I think most parents typically experience from their school, because educators rely on parents so much right now. I'd love to. I think that sort of speaks to two different implications I'd love to ask about. One is, as you sort of foreshadowed before, one is sort of what is the role of technology and some of the advances in learning engineering, learning sciences that can be leveraged to support parents really understand this new role around how to help them personalize their child's learning. And then also, who else do we need to be bringing into this process? Especially on the question of sort of how to address some of these gaps in access, but who else needs to be part of the, what other stakeholders, what other organizations and voices and resources need to be part of this solution. But let's start with the tech question and then go from there.
I can kick it off. So assuming the major hurdles are addressed, so assuming that parents have access to technology and broadband and everything that they need to support their kids, and they have an extra 20 some hours a week to support their kids, I think where technology can play a really important role is kind of in three main areas. One, in that it can be highly personalized and adaptive to the child. So really, really strong learning engineering and machine learning models can learn from child's inputs, the child's inputs, and can adapt to their specific level of skill. And great technologies are doing this. The other piece of research. So there's a lot of really, really great research that's going on right now to understand how to most effectively deliver content to kids in their zone of proximal development at their level through technology. And that's a piece that I think it's really been ramping up from what I've seen. And I think we're going to see more and more kind of research contributing to the development of these outstanding personalized and adaptive technologies. And I think the third place, and this is a place where we've really focused at Squiggle Park and Dreamscape, was engagement. Kids are at home learning. They've got so many distractions, and a lot of it is screen time distractions. So if we can build tools, like right now the bar is set so low in education, the tools are frankly just not engaging. But if we can build tools that are as much fun as video games that they play outside of the classroom to get kids to want to drive their learning, that's a big, big piece of it. I've talked to so many parents that have just thrown up their hands and they said, I've just given up. Like, I'm giving them the iPad and they're just going to spend the time on the iPad because I need to work, or I need to do what I need to do. And if we can have tools that actually enable learning, but are driving that motivation to want to play, that to me is a part of the key to success here, because we have so much competition out there in terms of media and what kids want to be engaged in, that frankly is just not beneficial, and I think maybe even harmful at times. So yeah, so I think that's where technology can really play an important role.
Julia, I love that you said that. And, personalized learning is obviously, I think, one of the biggest affordances of technology. It's just so exciting what it can do to meet every child where they're at. And personalization can also be related to what you were talking about just now around intrinsic motivation, right? Like taking inputs from the child, understanding what it is that motivates that child, and using that as a way to actually foster the learning and embedding those skills in contexts that really matter to the child. So that's definitely something that we're thinking a lot about. And I think the other thing that technology can help facilitate for parents is taking the data from what a child has done within an app and turning that into insights. So instead of just telling a parent, your child got 85%, provide this so what, like what does that mean, and what is that skill important for down the road? And I think even more importantly, how can you support that skill through everyday play off the screen as well? So I think that's another big piece, is really taking data and turning those into meaningful insights for parents.
I think the one thing I'll add to this, I think it's, so right now, my education team at the primary school, personalized learning is something we're excited that technology can play a big role in helping us. And one thing I've observed from our school and our team as we moved to this remote learning environment that we had to support families on, it taught us a lot of lessons, I think, on how to get regular parent input on how to make that technology go better. K-12 is a broad range of developmental needs of a kid, and Julie, I think a lot of your points around intrinsic motivation works really well for some of the older kids, but from the kindergarten, first grade, second grade, there still requires a caregiver or parental often engagement with the technology. And so we learned a lot from our parents in terms of what's going to make this go well in the home, and how do we adapt some of the learning platforms, and what sort of, Gloria, your point, tech salons and other supports that we need to be providing our families to engage with this technology, because it's not always as fluid as we think sometimes.
And Ryan, just before Gloria, I just want to challenge that a little bit, because I think that fantastic user-centered design can actually work even for the littlest littles. You know, I've seen it work even for preschoolers. We just have set the bar too low in terms of what we're delivering these kids. We've got a long way to go to make these programs awesome. And frankly, the video game industry has done it. Like, you know, you can see a preschooler playing a tap game for hours, frankly. And so we need to take the learnings from that industry and apply it to education and learning in a much, much better way. But it is still a problem, but it doesn't have to be. I think it can be better.
It's a good point.
I think the only thing that I would add in terms of technology, I guess, would be that I think the challenge and the opportunity for technology, not as a technologist, is really to think through the connectivity, the human to human connection that can happen, that really lowers social isolation. And so I'll give you one example. A lot of the families, like I said, that we work with don't speak English as a first language. There's sort of serious barriers. And it's through the technology that we've been able to foster peer-to-peer learning and connectivity to other support structures. And the one example that I can tell you is we worked with one of our families, a parent, and because we took the time, there was a lot of time, a lot of calls, to get him onto an online platform that he had never manipulated, had no knowledge how to use. As a direct result of that, his feedback to us was, now I'm teaching 8 other adults to be part of a prayer group. And that could not be possible, but for the fact that technology can play that role. I don't think we've actually thought of ourselves in that construct around social connectivity beyond some standard platforms that people use. But I think it's the peer-to-peer learning and that sort of social networking that happens that I think has the potential, if we're, as Julia, you said it, if we assume all these other institutional structural issues are addressed, that we can really be creative around how families that would otherwise be more socially isolated, we can support to create these peer-to-peer learning opportunities that are so vital. They won't ever, in my mind, replace the human-to-human contact. We still are humans, but I think it's really sort of weaving this together as a complement and seeing that as a value add, as opposed to as a barrier. I think it could really be a value added to the way in which we communicate and build community.
I love this discussion in thinking about the role of tech clearly around the new better ways of delivering content and sort of addressing the academic piece, and also around connectivity and social connection. And it's obviously so much more important in a world in which we're not able to gather physically, right? Hey, and this point, I want to bring it back to the equity question around tech. How do we think about the deployment of technology in a way that leverages all of this massive potential and also does not, at the end of the day, lead to larger gaps in access? where you have families with more resources being more likely and more better positioned to utilize and leverage that technology. How do we need to think about this broader context in order to equitably deploy this technology?
I'll say something shocking: disproportionately disrupt, right? Like we have to disproportionately, inequitably fund and support and disrupt the disconnection, right? Like the inequities, I think, are there. We know them, we understand them. I think the challenge for us, Sam, and this is why it seems revolutionary or shocking, but so obvious for those of us that are on the other side of the inequity divide, is that it's not that we may not know how to do this work, it's that we need actually the funding and the structure to make that possible, and that has to be intentional, right? So if you disproportionately fund and intentionally disrupt, I think that's how we keep equity. That's how you make equity be a thing. It's not a construct. Like you actually have to do things differently in order for this inequity thing that we created to not be there anymore, right? And so it seems so simple, and yet I would say it all boils down to our human desire, right? Our commitment to actually push ourselves to behave differently. And I challenge people listening to us, and I challenge, all of us collectively to say, how am I behaving any differently? What am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow to actually address the inequities that this pandemic or multiple crises have made evident, right? And if the answer is nothing yet, then guess what? The inequities will remain next month, the month after, the year after, right? So I think it seems for me very straightforward, but I think it's hard because it would mean actually changing the way in which we think about our role in addressing inequities systemically.
Yeah, it is systemic in that we have to change policy. Access to broadband, to good high-speed internet has to be a human right. We're delivering education, we're delivering medicine and healthcare via the internet. Every person needs to have access, and that is going to be disproportionate investment, and that has to happen. It just has to happen, and so there has to be policy change and people really pushing this, kind of top down. I think bottom up, I think what we need to do is have more flexible structures. Schools do not have to be a one size fits all approach. Every community has a different need. Every kind of probably group of city blocks within a community has different needs. And so we need to be flexible at understanding the needs of that community and making sure that our education system is responding to those needs. And they're definitely not the same in any community. And so there has to be some flexibility in the design of these structures, and people who are given the authority and the agency to make change at their community level in terms of how education is delivered.
Love this. We just dove right into the question of systems redesign. So let's keep going on this thread and kind of re-envisioning if we were to rethink this system in a way that better meets the needs of families, what might that look like? Ryan, would also like your take on sort of the concept of holistic needs, as well as thinking about, we tend to in education sort of design interventions very specifically around, a specific child, as you know, and through your work, there's not just that, it's not just a single child, right? That child lives with the family. And a family is experiencing a whole set of interconnected needs. How should we think about this question of wraparound services, or some people call it sort of the 2-generational model of thinking about supporting families holistically, parents and their children. How might we think about that in a new world?
Yeah, no, it's that question is what drove me to my work at the primary school, which is essentially we're trying to reimagine what can a school model really be to support the whole family. And it is not a school that looks like many others. It's the different on the block, to Julia's point. And it comes right back to where we started, where one of the pillars of the primary school is to support parent wellness, which comes back to when parents are stressed, have difficulty meeting basic needs, it's going to be really hard for them to engage with their child the way they want to. All parents want the best for their kids, and so we're making some investments into a parent coaching program with the belief that we feel, no matter what the circumstance, everyone could benefit from some coaching that could be focused on their own wellness as a core pillar of our school. That's sort of a radical idea to be investing in this, and we're really proud of that work. And as a pediatrician, I'm then weaving in the healthcare intersections to be thinking about the whole child, to make sure we're not missing any health barriers to learning for each kid in our school. And these are some different concepts for a school model, but COVID is, I think, in my mind, just elevated the need for these kind of models to be coming to surface.
Love the coaching reference. As an ex-athlete, I'd like to think I still have a little bit of it. Coaches in my life were so critical, and they stayed with me over time. They got to know me, they got to know my family, they knew my motivation, they knew my barriers, and they were able to pull out the best in me. And that's one thing I'd love to experiment with a little bit in the system is to have teachers have the ability to have those longer term relationships with students. So it's not just a certain kind of so many month period where you know the students and then they're gone from you. And I've seen teachers lobby to keep their classes from last year so that when they started this year, they hit the ground running, they knew the kids, they knew the families. And I think that approach from the educator standpoint is so smart. It's so smart because you can start to really get to know the kids that you're dealing with in a deeper way. And I think that's a big part of the redesign that I think could be very, very helpful.
I think there's so much good stuff in here. There's another thing that's, maybe it's just my own, two kids running around in the background, but just this point that, we don't always directly head on, but is such a massive sort of almost elephant in the room around this, which is the question of childcare. And we don't really like to talk about the role that schools play as childcare providers, but as we all know, especially now, they clearly do play a very important role there. And at the same time, if you think about sort of our standard school calendar, I'm not sure for what family, childcare from 8:30 to 3. And none in the summer is an actual effective, sustainable approach to childcare. And how might we think about redesigning structures that do better support families around, and in ways that do all the things you're talking about, optimize for relationships, incorporate, the best of what tech can offer. But really sort of better address both the educational needs of the child and the logistical needs of the families.
I think, Sam, I spent 14 years in early childhood, and I think that this is probably, in my best advocacy days, I could not have gotten people to talk about early childhood as much as they have in the last 6 months, right? And that's because we all recognize that in order for adults to function well in whatever capacity outside of their home, and sometimes I would argue even in their home, they actually need this additional support that we call childcare. And so we can't be segmenting these systems, because it's kind of going back to what we were talking about. How is it that a family, a child that lives in a family, that lives in a community, how do we then address holistically how that family is best able to not just support their child's learning, importantly, but also function optimally or to the best of their ability to navigate whether it's a crisis, and as is the case now, right? The reason why we're talking about childcare in this context is because we need essential workers to show up to work, which is an interesting, it's not for the well-being of children or families, it's because doctors, nurses, grocery clerks, custodians needed to put their kids somewhere so that they can show up to work so that the rest of the world can function, right? So to me, this is kind of the conundrum, right? That until we see families holistically, we won't, we need to then restructure our systems, not as siloed, but sort of as a through line, right? And I think the other part to this, which we didn't chat about here, but is the role of higher education, right? So when you were asking this question about what other stakeholders, how are we thinking about this? I think a critically important aspect of this is our institutions of higher education for two reasons. One, because they are the institution or the system that trains future teachers on what it means to be a teacher. And until we change that construct really of how teachers get trained to be teachers and not be the child, but the family, we're behind the 8 ball. And then the second is, what does higher education actually mean, especially for students, and the interconnectedness of what that experience is with the added responsibility that many college students now are faced with, providing childcare to their younger siblings, supporting their younger siblings' learning because they're the ones that are most technology savvy, right? So I think as we think about these systems, in some ways it's like early childhood through higher ed, and sort of, because that's the trajectory of children and families, right? We don't live in these little silos. As nice as those might be, we need to really think about the holistic needs of children and families. And I think this is the moment, right? This crisis is allowing us the freedom to not silo our thinking, which is, I think, exceptionally exciting and a big challenge for us.
Absolutely, love that. 2 minutes. And so what I'm going to ask is, in one final whip around, if everybody could have about 20 seconds. We didn't get our audience poll questions to work, but would like everybody to weigh in quickly on this question of what's going to take hold. We are in this massive moment of disruption. Do you do a little bit of tea leaf reading? Do you think that the system, we are going to be capable of reimagining ourselves in the context of this disruption? How do you think parents are going to change the way that they interact with the school system? And what will it take to get there? Let's start with Jody.
I think we're going to see more creativity in how we define education. I think we're going to see more ongoing parent involvement in various capacities and parent empowerment. I think parents are going to have more of a say in what they need. I hope they get more of a say in what they need, and that we can creatively harness the power of technology and innovation to support families.
Wonderful. Julia.
Oh, I wish I could be so optimistic. I'm nervous, frankly. I'm worried for the time it's going to take to figure this out. I think it's going to take us a little while to figure this out.